All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of Leaders in Conversation, Leading for Tomorrow, How to Shift the Leadership Landscape for the Next Generation. My name is Megan Peacock, and I'm going to be your host this evening. And it would be really great if you could let us know in the chat box where you are, where you're tuning in from. Pop that in the chat box and let's see. So Leaders in Conversation is a monthly webinar hosted by Boundless Leadership. And Boundless Leadership is a branch of Boundless Wisdom. And our mission is to scale purposeful leadership for today and tomorrow. And I want to invite you to follow Boundless Wisdom on LinkedIn and make sure that you sign up to our weekly newsletter. And if you look over at the chat box, you can find the link to do so over there. So you can follow us on LinkedIn, you can sign up to our weekly newsletter, and that way you can just stay in touch with what we're getting up to with our latest offerings. So the purpose of Leaders in Conversation is not to share answers, but it's to share questions and generate conversation together. So as we go through this episode, I want to invite you guys to drop your comments, your insights, and your questions into the chat box, and we will be having a period of Q&A with our guests later on. So just to make you aware of that, keep thinking as we go through this episode and put your questions in the chat box for us to answer later on. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce our guests for the evening. I have with me Kachne Ross and Josslyn Stevens. Welcome to the show. So before we dive into the episode, I want to hand over to our guests and ask them to introduce themselves in their own words. So Kachne, will you kick it off for us? Will you just introduce yourself to our audience tonight?
Sure, Megan, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you to Boundless Wisdom for having me. My name is Kachne Ross. I am employed in the South African wine industry. I've been working in the industry for about 20 years, and I pretty much enjoy the industry and the people working in the industry. I am primarily qualified as viticulturist because I am very in touch with nature. I love planning and I love growth. And after starting my career as viticulturist, I discovered a passion for people. Then I started lecturing in viticulture, very technical, at Elsenburg College. And while my career developed there, I discovered a passion for people, for people. And that is where I have decided that life is so much bigger and I want to develop not only plants, but also people. And then I equipped myself philosophically and because I wanted to understand adult learning, I did a master's in higher education, and which focused a lot on people learning how they learn, the educational landscape on a tertiary level. And then after that, I started working for our industry organizations that is actually there to render service to industry in a people development role, which is the role that I am in now. I'm driven by people. I am driven by creating opportunities. And I am very eager for being that catalyst of development for our people in our industry. Aside from my job, of which I'm 7 years in already, I am a mother of 2 kids, and yeah, I have 2 dogs and also a parrot. Thank you for having me.
That's amazing. Thanks, Kachne. And Josslyn, would you please introduce yourself to our guests?
Thanks, Megan. I do apologize. My computer's telling me I have an unstable internet. So I hope it's not too bad from your guys' side. But But yeah, hi everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Josslyn. For those of you on the call that don't know me, I am a registered organizational psychologist, and I'm really passionate about finding abundance in people's lives. I'm currently working as an independent consultant, as the co-founder and director of my company, 2X Advisory. And I am an associate at Boundless Leadership and Boundless Wisdom, where I am an advisor. But really, I like to say that I'm a change manager. I'm a people and team enabler and a leadership developer. I have worked in numerous industries, in many different companies. And yeah, I am also accredited in multiple psychometric assessments. And I've recently certified as a reinvention practitioner. And lastly, I am an animal lover. My animals have just walked into the room to join us. I am a nature enthusiast. I'm a gym bunny. I'm an outdoor adventurer. Recently just became a wife, and as mentioned, I'm a mom to 2 cat fur babies. And that's me.
Joss, it's really great to have you guys. So in this episode, I'm going to dive into our topic for tonight. We are talking about how to lead for tomorrow, which sounds like a pretty big task. And how do we shift the leadership landscape for young leaders? And I wanted to preface this whole evening by asking our guests to weigh in on what do they feel their definition of young leaders is. Because as I was thinking about it myself in preparation for this week, I kind of just got this feeling like I don't really think that it's limited to age alone. And I know, Kachne, you'll agree with me. So I'd love if you would just share your definition of young leaders with our audience tonight.
Thank you, Megan. When I started preparing for this topic, I really had to identify from what it means by being a leader, and up until bringing it to myself. And I think the best definition for me would be, and the next generation leader would be somebody that challenges themselves, that remains relevant, that is forward thinking and hungry to do better, but who is also empathetic, and who is cognizant of the changing world of business, the changing world of leadership and the leadership landscape, and the changing world of people and the human being. I think the being is a big factor that needs to be considered in today's leadership roles. So for me, that is the most important things.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The thing that really stood out for me is just that, to me, the next generation of leaders, it's not age bound. It's anyone who is willing to kind of carry over the things that are working in leadership, and who's dedicated to, working on the things that aren't. And so before, we're talking about leading for tomorrow, but I think before we get into that, a good place to start is to get a snapshot of what the leadership landscape looks like today. So in our last episode of Leaders in Conversation, there was a piece of research that was shared from it's called the Global Leadership Forecast, and it's done every year by an institution called DDI. And they surveyed 13,695 leaders across 1,500 organizations. And they wanted to get a picture of the leadership landscape. And the top 3 concerns of leaders today are attracting and retaining top talent, developing the next generation of leaders, which is what we're talking about tonight, and maintaining an engaged workforce, which I kind of think relates to the previous one, because how do you develop the next generation of leaders if they're not engaged? And so these considerations actually outranked things like digital transformation, the global recession, outperforming competitors, all of these kinds of things that you would think would rank pretty highly. And so as we think about shifting the leadership landscape for the next generation, I couldn't help but wondering, what do you guys feel like, Josslyn and Kachne, what do you feel are the kind of characteristics of the leadership landscape that are supporting the next generation of leaders? Do you feel that that's the case? Are the next generation of leaders being supported by the leadership landscape right now?
I'll take a stab at that quickly. To an extent, I think yes, but if I'm truly honest, from what I've seen and what I've experienced, I would say mostly no. Actually, I don't feel that the next generation of leaders are particularly supported. And there's a few reasons behind that. I think there's this old school thinking that is dominating at the moment. And it's thinking around things like, if it ain't broke, why fix it? And a mentality around, well, it's been done this way for many years, for centuries even, so why change it? And I know it's a very particular environment, so I may be talking out of line, but the first kind of example that comes to mind is when thinking of doctors. For example, you often hear about stories of where doctors, as I think they're called MOs, more senior doctors, treating interns really badly. And you ask them, but why? Why treat them badly? And almost with an element of hostility. And they always say, because that's how I was treated. So, they need to learn in the same way that we have learned. And there is that same sort of mentality that I find even in the general workplace, where we're not really being proactive in how we change our leadership style. It's very much a reactive way of leading. And as a result, leaders are constantly on the back foot trying to kind of react to whatever comes their way. And I think COVID is a very good example of how we had to react as leaders. And we're currently now in that sort of back foot stage, is where I'm finding our leadership landscape. And then maybe just to add to that, I think we've all heard the saying, change is the only constant. But the reality is that, yes, it's the only constant, it's constant, but it's happening faster and faster these days, and change is just always going to be there. And as a result, we can't keep reacting as leaders. We've got to have a more proactive approach, and anticipate those changes that are inevitable. And then when you talk about these three concerns of leadership, I think it's interesting because I believe each one of those is directly related to better leadership. With better leadership, you are better equipped to attract the right talent. You are able to retain top talent because the talent can see, that there is some sort of trajectory. They are wanting to model the same behaviors as their leaders, and it kind of has a trickle down effect. And likewise with engagement levels, you mentioned that, Megan, that it's having better leadership truly does engage your workforce. And I've personally experienced that, where I've lost engagement due to the fact that my leaders weren't being supportive in a way that I needed them to. So yeah, that's my take. Sorry, let me hand over to Kachne.
And hearing you say that as well, like the thought comes to mind, if leaders are stuck in reactivity to all the change that's coming at us at such a rapid rate, like how do you have the resources left over to develop the next generation? So moving from that reactive space, I feel like is such a key piece of being able to prepare the next generation. What are your thoughts on that, Kachne? Do you feel that the leadership landscape is supportive for the next generation?
Sure, I want to concur on a lot of Josslyn's points, but I really want to take it from our industry perspective, where and just to add on to that, is that after COVID and climate change and all the things that influence the agricultural sector and our industry are in such a survival mode at the moment that I am so worried that we don't address what needs to be addressed in order to equip the industry to adapt to that change. However, I also feel that because of that, we have become more agile and disruptive and also adaptive, but are we not losing out on equipping our leaders and the younger leaders with the real tools and survival tools in order to lead for the future? So that for me is a concern in my industry. However, I think we have a lot of brilliant programs in place. And I think we have kind of demystified the notion of the wine industry being led by older generational people who owns estates. That landscape has changed across the value chain, and we're not talking just about owning land or being a winemaker or being a viticulturist, but we are talking now about other occupations and roles as well, and how do we diversify that and people in those positions. It is not perfect yet, but we are starting to think about it and putting tools in place on a strategic level and resource level in order to help with that talent retention, equipping ourselves to be future ready in terms of leadership and diversification, which is a huge thing for me, and it's something that our industry need in terms of leadership in order to make decisions and stay relevant. So yeah, that's my point of view.
Yeah, it's so great to hear from an industry perspective, Kachne, from your industry in particular. And I'm wondering, for the people listening, if you could just drop in the chat box, is that something that you relate to, this experience of your industry kind of being stuck in sort of reactivity, being stuck in survival mode, maybe since COVID or maybe even before that? I would love to know if that's an experience that is kind of spanning across industries. So let us know in the chat box. And that brings me to our second question, because we're talking from the perspective of kind of leaders and industry leaders, thought leaders looking into these processes. But I want to ask you guys to cast your mind back to your own experiences of being led. And tell me, what were some of the characteristics that you saw in the leadership landscape, that you saw in the people who led you, that were keeping you stuck, keeping you frustrated, and maybe are the same things that are keeping the next generation of leaders stuck or frustrated right now? So what are your experiences from being led of the things that kept you stuck and frustrated?
Shall I take this one? I think for me, being a woman in the wine industry, and I'm getting very personal here because it is a reality for a lot of women in our industry, is growth and growth opportunities, and women receiving the same type of recognition as opposed to the men in our industry sitting on higher leadership levels. Taking myself, I have implemented 2 systems for the entire wine industry, for example, to use. But I had to it took me 5 years to get buy-in. And I had to start on a certain level to get buy-in from the top. So yes, there's growth and there's growth opportunities, but you have to work really hard, and you need to reestablish your confidence and your beliefs and your leadership. It really tests your leadership to show that yes, as a woman, you can also do that. Yeah, and for industry to see that, and our industry leaders to see that I think I'm in a fortunate position. I don't think it is that easy for everybody in our industry.
Yeah, and that's such a shame as well, that there was that lack of support or nurturance. I see we have a comment in the chat box saying that Mikhail, in his industry, that there is a lack of support from existing leadership. And Kachne, for you to echo that and say, as you were, you've been wildly successful in your industry, but what a shame that that wasn't recognized sooner by leaders who were dedicated to nurturing talent and really supporting the next generation. Joss, what's your experience of the kind of the things keeping you stuck and frustrated when you were in a position of being led?
Yeah, also from more of a personal side of things than a general or kind of best practice knowledge point of view. I think what I have been frustrated in the past when being when being led was an element of inauthenticity with my leaders. I do think that is also a personal thing from the point of view that it's something that I value. And so I would want it almost reflected back to me. But I have always had a sense from my leaders, not all of them, let me put that out there. A lot of the leaders that I have had, there's been this sense of them pursuing their own agenda at the cost of the people that they're leading. It's this mentality that I've never really understood, because it's, if we're not thinking about what's in it for everyone, how are you going to be sustainable as a company? And then it talks to those three things that you're mentioning, retaining talent. So it's inauthenticity, and then I think, again, very personally, a lack of care or concern for me as an individual outside of work. I'm not just a person working. There's a lot more to me, and there's things that matter to me that should also be taken into account from leaders. And obviously I'm speaking from a personal point of view, but I do think it's important to understand the whole person in the leadership world. But more than that, it's actually a balance of caring for the individuals while also challenging them to a point that keeps them engaged, and using their skills and using their strengths. I can speak from an example where I was completely underutilized, not from an hour consulting point of view, but from the point of view that I was doing mundane work just because it was work that needed to be done. And my engagement levels were shocking, to the point where I ended up leaving the organization, despite trying to have conversations with my leaders to, give me other things to do that challenge me. So yeah, that's my kind of take on it.
And I feel like that's such a simple fix, but how many people have been asked by their leaders, hi, like, what do you actually enjoy doing? What are your skills? What are your strengths? And then let's try and make sure that you're doing tasks, that you are doing work that actually, aligns with those skills and strengths. But I think it's important that you highlight too, Joss, that different people want different things out of their workplace, out of leadership or their leaders. And I think the research really reflects that too, because workplaces are changing at an unprecedented rate because of the growth of life expectancy. We have workplaces that span up to 5 generations all in one organization, which is incredible, but also something very new. And across these different generations, people want very different things. So for instance, research shows that younger generations value meaningful and purposeful work more than they do something that just pays the bills and sort of ticks the box. And so we've kind of talked about what are some of the difficulties in the leadership landscape. But I want to ask you guys to pivot to kind of that future-looking view. What are the leadership qualities that people are looking for? You kind of touched on it a little bit in terms of authenticity, caring, and daring leadership. But what are sort of the core competencies, the core abilities that the next generation need to develop, and that people are actually looking for in their leaders today? Joss, you can kick this one off for us.
Sorry. Thanks, Megan. I think broadly speaking, this is where we're starting to see an increased reliance on the soft skills. So yeah, I mentioned authenticity, authentic leadership. But I think what the research is showing in terms of, this increased the increased tech advances, I've already mentioned, the constantly changing landscape that we work in. There's more and more need for kind of truly human or humane skills in leading others, and I think that's where the difference between leading and managing comes into play as well. And so I really feel that people are looking for more authentic and personalized leadership, like I've already sort of spoken to. But more than that, I think now future generations are looking for a safe space, a place where they are able to kind of challenge the status quo, ask those why questions of their leaders, change kind of the way of thinking, that old reactive way of thinking, to be more proactive. And so if you think about the different generations previously, we had the baby boomers who, for them, safety was around security in the workplace. Whereas now you're looking at people, safety for them is a space in which they are able to be themselves holistically. They're able to kind of really put their thoughts out there, and to experiment, I guess. But a space where they are able to experiment without fear of being sort of shunted or misunderstood. So yeah, psychological safety is a really big thing that I think leaders need to consider for future.
Absolutely. That makes me think of a piece of research that came from Harvard University, where they actually found that 85% of your career success comes from having well-developed soft skills and people skills. And all of that you just covered, relates back to the people skills. How do you see another person's talents and abilities and nurture those things in them? Kachne, what do you feel the leadership landscape would ideally look like? What are the characteristics that the next generation of leaders are looking for?
I think the very foundation of a good leader is values, right? A good value base that is employee and employer accepted. Because sometimes we allow people in that does not have the same values or agree on the same values, and then you start to differ and don't understand each other. So I think as a leader, to be able to portray that would build trust, which is another big thing. If there is no trust, if you don't trust your leader and your leader don't trust or don't even know you, I think there's trouble. And I think the younger generation sometimes misunderstand trust However, trust could unlock their potential and capabilities. So for me, that's a big thing. I think being able to communicate on a certain level and a respectful level is also very crucial, because sometimes we lack that in our younger generation that comes in. And I think leaders should be able to create a safe work culture, with the pointers that Josslyn has raised. Because our younger generations who are so socially inclined, I think they need to feel safe in the space that they are working in. So for me, those are the core, deeper characteristics of a young leader that we should really build on and keep.
Absolutely. And I think that you highlight that kind of goes both ways. If you are in leadership and you have the next generation of leadership that you're training up, these are qualities that you need to be modeling to them. This, relational leadership, that trust, that respect, that authenticity. But for the next generation of leaders, these are characteristics that you want to embody as well. Embody those qualities. We have some comments in the chat box over here that I'm just going to read. We have Yassine, who says, I think I can agree with what was said around underutilization. I think it goes back to current leaders following what their leaders said and requested, whereas with our generation, we're driven and we want a challenge. We want to climb the ladder much quicker. And the reality is that with our generation, if we don't get what we're looking for in terms of growth, we'll move on, which is such a powerful observation. So current generations and future leaders have a lack of loyalty because growth has become personal. And then we have Mikhail, who says that I think future leaders need an environment that fosters growth, interaction, and flexibility to explore new ideas, which is what Joss touched on. And we need new ideas, new opportunities, and leaders that value impact. They're impact driven. Because we as a generation, we seek purpose in our work. And those are really, really powerful insights. Remember as well that we're going to have a time of Q&A towards the end, so please pop your questions into the chat box. So we've looked at kind of the drawbacks of the leadership landscape. We've looked at the ideal leadership landscape that we would like to see, that we want to embody, that we would love to see the next generation kind of taking on. But what are some of the icebergs? This is kind of like the story of the Titanic, the iceberg that they didn't see coming. And if we've experienced anything in the last couple of years, it's that often we need a little bit more foresight to look at the icebergs that are coming ahead. And icebergs are basically challenges that we may or may not be equipped to deal with, but if we can look ahead, if we can have the adequate foresight, we can be prepared and we can use them as opportunities instead. So the question is, what icebergs are coming ahead for the next generation of leaders? And before I get your answers on this one, I want to highlight an interesting part of the DDI research, which, by the way, you can find in the chat box if you'd like to download and read through that yourself. But the research highlighted the 5 core competencies that they believe the next generation of leaders need to develop. And I think this kind of gives us a little bit of insight into the icebergs coming, because these are the skills needed to address those icebergs. And the 5 core skills that need to be developed by the next generation of leaders are the ability to identify and develop future talent, strategic thinking, managing successful change, decision-making, prioritization, and influencing others. And I think the discussion so far has been totally spot on, because I think these kind of span the relational leadership, the caring leadership, and the daring leadership. The ability to be a humane leader who nurtures others. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the icebergs coming ahead for the next generation. Josslyn, you can kick this one off for us.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, I think it's not necessarily specifically related to the 5 kind of core skills for the future, but it's very relevant. And I think after COVID, it's become more relevant, and that's employee well-being and people's mental health. So I'm speaking more broadly, you know, in various industries. So I'm sure it may be different in the wine industry, which Kachne can speak to. But I think to that, perhaps it speaks to influencing others, in that a skill that I think is going to be really important is in anticipating the iceberg of employee well-being, is having a level of empathy for your employees and those that you lead. And I think in that, setting the right sort of priorities and levels of focus. I've spoken about challenging, and I think it comes hand in hand, like you were saying, Megan, with caring and daring leadership. You know, being able to see and check in with those you lead to see if they're doing okay, and if they need a challenge, challenging them to a point that's kind of achievable. I think another iceberg, or maybe a threat, which again we've mentioned already, is around the rapid pace of change. And it's about, and it, I suppose, is mentioned in your 5 skills around managing successful change. I think more than that, it's around becoming comfortable with change and helping those you lead be comfortable with that change. And that comes with something that Kachne mentioned earlier, an important competency around communicating effectively. And when I say effectively, I mean communicating in a way that speaks to the generations which do communicate differently, and understanding those nuances. And in addition to that, again, Kachne mentioned it, is the sort of diversification in leadership, but also diversification in people's opinion, getting that diverse sense of opinion, which is created through psychological safety, creating that safe space, and allowing people to experiment, allowing them to be curious, so that they are able to kind of make better decisions and think strategically, you know. So yeah, I kind of went a little bit off track there, but I think they're all important elements.
Absolutely.
In anticipating that change.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with us, Joss. And Kachne, what do you feel are the icebergs coming up for the next generation of leaders? I see we have a comment saying one possible iceberg could be inclusivity in business decision making, and you kind of touched on that earlier. I don't know if you could maybe speak to that a little bit. How do you feel that the leadership landscape is addressing that challenge? Are we doing enough to turn that into an opportunity where we're really drawing on the strength of diverse business decision making? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I can give a very long answer to this one, but in terms of inclusivity and decision making and being able to decide on whatever, in my space we are being encouraged to do that. But so I think it is really important, and I know it's not happening everywhere, but I'm going to park that quickly, and maybe it will latch on with how I end. As an industry, and sorry for reverting back to as an industry the whole time, I think what we are trying to do is to foster a culture of taking responsibility of the employees working in the industry, right? So that's big. And how do you do that? What we have done is we have developed competencies, workplace competencies, leadership competencies, soft skills competencies, technical competencies across the value chain in order to pinpoint what the icebergs possibly could be, because otherwise where do we get our information or industry specific information from? We have a very unique industry. So we've looked at the unique positions, and we also want to see like where's the talent throughout this entire industry. So the system that we've developed includes the entire industry, but now for industry to get on board and take responsibility, we've developed the competencies. So leaders or anybody working in the industry can complete it. But now the trick is your employer and yourself needs to be involved in your development process and identifying your competencies. How do we ensure that the right leadership competencies are in there and the future competencies are there? So we get experts in through the different parts of the value chain and put it in there. If that has been identified, we link up with the learning institutions or those who give short programs. And as an industry, we say we can only endorse you, and we will endorse your program, for example, Business in Wine course, if you ensure that the following competencies are being met, because this is what our industry needs. And in that way, we ensure that our industry become workplace ready and relevant. And I haven't mentioned that, but we started a professional body. So what professional bodies does, it's a self-regulatory kind of system that is voluntary, that would hopefully ensure that a person would want to become more confident, and you want to become a better leader than the second one, or the one next to him, or his neighbor farmer, or the neighbor viticulturist, so that the industry becomes self-regulating in developing leaders or people, and the industry recognizing that and taking responsibility of building people and ensuring that there's a growing pathway, and ensuring that there are programs in place to help make people relevant, leaders included, in the space. So this is, we're at the very beginning of this, but I see that, I think personally, we are busy with legacy work in the industry. And like I said earlier, we are really demystifying the landscape for the South African wine industry. And I'm really so proud to share this with you. So yes, all of these are really important, and we encounter the same, but we are being preventative of falling into that.
Yeah. When I hear you say that, the thing that just like hits me between the eyes is just like impeccable systems awareness. Like, you know, I'm sure if you, I don't know if you know the leadership circle profile, but I'm sure, Kachne, if you took that, your systems awareness would be off the charts, because, and what an incredible solution that in a way is a catch-all to whatever problem you're facing, because it's the process of investigating throughout your whole system. Where is it breaking down? And how can we then intervene at that specific place to make sure that our whole value chain is rock solid and we're getting the outcomes that we need. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, you should be proud for implementing that. That's incredible.
Waiting for that day. I'm waiting for that day, Megan, where we see real impact.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's such a great example too, across industries, of a way that you can begin to kind of address some of these problems, whether it's lack of talent nurturance or whatever the problem might be, is to develop that systems awareness. That's such a powerful solution. So this discussion, you know, it's been incredible, and we've been kind of discussing maybe slightly more abstract ideas, you know, psychological safety and all these kinds of things. But I want to wrap up with just some really practical application for the leaders and the change makers who are listening right now. what are some of the practical steps that organizations can take? You know, someone walks out of this conversation tomorrow in the office, they pitch an idea, you know, the practical steps that they can take to nurture the next generation of leaders. Kachne, you kind of touched on this, and I want to hand this question over you to take a first pass at it.
I want to bring in something really new, and that is thinking about your brand as a leader, your brand, and how you would like to see the brand of the leader that is leading you, and being able to feel comfortable in assessing that and saying, how do I take myself and how can I help? It's a challenge. How do I help the next leader or my leader to build a brand of confidence and enable a type of leadership brand that listens and that builds trust, that expose other leaders, that identify and grow talent, and that accept the fact that we need to fast track the younger leaders in order for us not to lose out on them, and to look broader than just the current landscape, but look broader in terms of a diversified group that might bring more to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And that relates to that comment that we had earlier, where, you know, if we don't capitalize on the talent in front of us, then the reality is that people will move on and they will find a place where their strengths are recognized. Josslyn, what would you say are some of the practical steps that organizations can take to really nurture the next generation of leaders?
I think a quick one would be really just role modeling some of the competencies and behaviors that we've just been talking about tonight, for example. But, you know, using tools like you mentioned, Megan, the leadership circle, to kind of better understand your own leadership tendencies, but also the leadership tendencies within your team, so that you can, and not just the leadership circle, but other personality assessments that help us to understand how to kind of better communicate with the different people in our teams, so that, you know, you are working better together. And then I think maybe just latching onto Kachne's sort of idea around branding, and that's giving people an opportunity to figure out their own why and their own purpose, and linking it back to what Kachne was saying around your values, and understanding, you know, what are my values and are they actually aligned to that of my company? And if not, do I need to question where I am? And if they are, how can I now use those values to guide me as a leader to become the best version of myself? And I think a lot of organizations don't give enough kind of time to people understanding themselves as a person, so that they are better equipped to lead. Yeah, and it goes back to what we were saying around the people skills, the soft skills. It starts with yourself. Yeah, and I think with that, maybe also just creating feedback loops, so that you are understanding and growing and getting information from those around you, so that you can adapt your leadership in a way that's best suited for you and your team.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a comment in the chat box suggesting too that one of the practical ways we can nurture the next generation is to read up on millennials and Gen Z, the different generations in the workforce, and
yes,
you know, what makes them tick. And I think that speaks to your point, Josslyn, that maybe we are not spending enough on understanding ourselves and helping our teams understand, you know, what are their leadership strengths and what are their leadership blind spots. And that's something too in my preparation for this episode that really encouraged me, is even in terms of something simple like supporting the strengths of your team. It's something called perceived organizational support of strengths use. And research shows that particularly the younger generations look for that. They look for, am I being supported in my strengths? And it actually drives engagement. So that's another really practical, simple tool that leaders can use to really nurture the next generation, on top of developing that relational leadership and all those other incredible points that you guys raised. So I want to move now to a time of Q&A. And we had a question earlier in the chat box from Crispin. And he he said, I'm wondering whether there are sufficient role models that young leaders want to aspire to. So I don't know who wants to feel that, but do you feel that young leaders have enough role models in the leadership landscape? It's a tricky one.
Sorry, Kachne, if you don't mind, I'll be fairly quick. I think if I can sort of change it slightly, I don't know if I feel there are enough really good role models. There are people that, at least for myself, I've looked up to and thought are really great leaders, but have then over time kind of considered it more and thought, actually, no, I was just thinking they're a good leader because they kind of depict this hardworking individual, but it's not necessarily what makes a good leader. So perhaps my short answer is no.
Okay, wow, yeah. I like how you differentiate too between good role models and bad role models, because you're copying someone, but the question is, are they worth imitating? Kachne, what are your thoughts?
I always say don't try and preempt and mold yourself around someone based on what you see and then you kind of just stuck onto that, but in the meantime you are much more. So I think that yes, you can highlight some models and different types of leaders and take what you need from that. But I wouldn't say it is ideal to have one person or one mentor, for example. I had a mentor, but I had to divorce my mentor, for example, because we didn't believe in the same things. So be true to yourself and take the pieces that you need from different role models and leaders across your scope.
Yeah, I love that. And that kind of speaks to what you guys mentioned earlier in terms of diversity of opinion and very inclusive business decision-making. If you have kind of fostered your leadership by having a diverse role model base where you are looking at different leadership styles in different industries, I think that definitely predisposes you to being someone who's more open to opinions and more inclusive. Do we have any other questions from...
Can I just add to that as well? I think what Kachne is also saying speaks to what we were talking about in terms of being an authentic leader. Don't try and copy someone, because then you're not really being an authentic leader yourself. But take what speaks to you and hone those skills.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. And we, in our recent newsletter, we were speaking, funny enough, about radically human leadership and the benefits of radically human leadership. And as we bring this evening to a close, I just want to encourage everyone listening to remember that the change starts with you, and that by being authentic leaders, by developing our own self-awareness and this kind of systems awareness, that we will be the ones who kind of carry over into the next generation of leadership. We have that power to play a role in what the leadership landscape actually looks like. And so, as our title says, Leading for Tomorrow, I want to encourage each and every one of you to adopt that mindset of asking yourself, how can I lead for tomorrow in a way that I am both being a role model to leaders coming after me, and also communicating authentically with the people that I'm being led by about the kind of behavior that I would like to see them model. But I want to just thank our guests, Kachne and Josslyn, just for the incredible insights that they've shared with us tonight. I really appreciate you guys giving your time just to be here with us. And I want to thank you to everyone who has attended for bringing your insights and bringing your questions, and also just giving us your time to participate in this conversation. So I hope that you guys have found this discussion as invaluable as I definitely have. So if you would like to explore ways that you can work with Boundless Leadership, you can look into the chat box and you will find our portfolio for the work that we do. If you'd like to work with us, if your team is needing help managing change, learning how to lead for tomorrow, nurturing talent, all those things that we've talked about this evening, you can find our brochure in the chat box. And please don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, and we will see you for the next episode.